Um, uh, Welcome to all the panelists. Welcome to all the attendees. My name is Pratik. I'm an advisor with the Bridge India team, and I'm really happy to welcome you to the latest Now webinar series on the space sector in India. Bridge India is a think tank in London. We started about 1.5 years ago. It's a registered non-profit, and the aim of Bridge India is to help build greater understanding about India, whether it's economy, civil society, government, politics, across Europe. So while we have an office in the UK, we're about to later this year expand into Europe. This is the third webinar we've done in the last few days, and each one of them has been very, very diverse on a range of different sectors. My job is just to make sure that we get good questions coming through, they're moderated well, and if you have any IT questions, you can feel free to message me while the panelists are speaking. Some house rules from me. We've got an hour session, and we've got a lot of panelists, and all of them are equally distinguished and very, very interesting in what they do. So please do throw good questions their way. This session is also live on Facebook, or it will be in the next 60 seconds or so. We'll also upload the whole webinar on YouTube tomorrow. So if you haven't been able to catch it live, you'll be able to do it on Facebook or YouTube. Please do tweet at bridgeindia.org, or tag us on a Facebook post, or tag us on LinkedIn at Bridge India. The session is going to be chaired and moderated by Raqib, who's a trustee of Bridge India, but more importantly, he also works at the UK Space Agency as the lead for engagement with India. So I'm going to leave you in Raqib's capable hands now. And if and when you see polls coming up on your screen throughout the 1 hour, please do take 2 seconds to click on the answer. And then as soon as the answers from everybody come in, I'll share the results with everyone. Thanks. Over to you, Raqib.
Thanks for that, Pratik. Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our talk earlier on. Apologies for the digression from space. But as Pratik said, my name is Raqib. I'm a trustee for Bridge India. My day job, however, is working for the UK Space Agency as an international policy manager, where I lead on bilateral relations with India. And it was actually in this job and through my engagement with Indian counterparts, both government and business, at events like, for instance, the launch of the Kerala Space Park, that really opened my eyes to the potential of the Indian space sector. India already has the 6th largest institutional space market, and its national space agency, ISRO, has recorded a series of impressive achievements, ranging from the Chandrayaan-1, which discovered the lunar water on the moon in 2008, to the Mars orbiter mission, which in 2014 made India the first space agency in Asia to reach Mars, and indeed the first space agency to reach Mars at its first attempt. But despite these sort of continual achievements, I actually believe the next steps in the evolution of the Indian space sector lies not with ISRO, but in the private sector and in the development of a commercial space market. Now, although private sector players play an increasingly engaged role with ISRO as suppliers and component manufacturers, they've not been able to scale level of economic activity to take the trajectories that the IT or the biotech sectors in India have taken previously. And so it's with this context in mind that we are having today's webinar, where we will consider 3 interlinked questions that will look at the evolution of the sector in the coming decades, how this will impact startups, and also how India can collaborate more effectively. So with reference to that first question, how might the space sector evolve over the coming decade? Narayan, I'd be grateful if you can give a general overview of how you think the space sector will grow in India over the coming decade. Hi, Narayan, I think you're on mute.
That basically focused the main idea. So we produce content, articles, and those to.
Hey, Narayan.
Hey, sorry, I just got Cut off.
Okay. Do you want me to move on to Prateep and come back to you?
No, sorry, say that again. I saw a question.
Oh, okay. So, right. Okay. So, with reference to our first question, how might the space sector evolve over the coming decade? I'd be grateful if you could give us a general overview of how you think the space sector will grow in India over the coming decade.
Yeah, so basically, I think in the last 1 decade, the major change that we see is a lot of the, the downstream technology kind of mature into more kind of B2B and B2C kind of models coming up. So for me, that's the kind of very exciting thing, because for the last 30 years or so, we've had people only stick to, doing business within the ISRO supply chain, and how things, they would be restricted to then doing things that ISRO would want, for example, either manufacture stuff or do services there. So essentially, I think that's the new exciting bit, where we have a bunch of startups, a bunch of new companies that have come up in the last decade or so, where they've tried to build their own products or own services, and it's both equally exciting on both the upstream and the downstream segment, where you see a bunch of companies trying to build either satellites or rockets, or at the same time you have these companies that are trying to build new services using satellite data or satellite positioning or so on. So that's the most exciting bit for me.
Are you done, Narayan?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, in which case, thank you very much for your answers there. And moving then on to Prateep, and thinking on what Narayan just reflected on, Prateep. Can you consider your experience with SatSure and your application of space data in sectors such as agriculture and financial services? And could you answer the question of how deeply are Indian downstream companies entrenched into end user markets today? And what are the primary challenges in adoption of them?
See, I think it's a very broad question, since the number of downstream companies is very high. In general, if you classify the companies into 3 segments: the product business model, the platform business model, and the pipeline business model, the product and platform companies would be more entrenched with the end users, while the pipeline companies, don't need to do that. Most of the companies today which are in the downstream domain are pipeline companies. So yes, there needs to be more user-centric development, needs to connect the technology with the business problem, and that's one of the biggest challenges in adoption. That is that what we find in the market, where either the insight that is generated from satellite imagery alone is not actionable, or the underlying cost becomes too high for addressing a larger business problem, or in general the problem itself that the user is demonstrating is not solvable by satellite. So there are hundreds of problems that you can solve. Which ones you pick, which ones not to touch, how to do solutioning rather than just making it a satellite image processing based service. That kind of timing and patience and co-development is required for the adoption challenge to be overcome, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Prateek. And then moving swiftly on to the sort of next person, Pawan. With reference to both what Prateep and Narayan said, and considering your experiences setting up Skyroot Aerospace and the development of the Vikram series launch vehicles, do you think upstream startups in India need to look for businesses primarily from outside of India, since most of its upstream activities are done by ISRO? And what are the major changes you're looking for in the upcoming years for your business to scale? Pawan, you're on mute.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're now audible, yes.
Yeah. So thanks, Raqib, for inviting first. So to answer the first question, uh, whether upstream startups require totally dependent on startups outside of India. I think it's true because, like for example, currently how upstream works is that several it's a typically government to government transaction where the government decides so and so satellites to be launched in the next few years, and ISRO manufactures them and also launches them. So typically the need is mainly from the government side. So the transaction happens from government to government. So currently it's totally in the purview of ISRO. But in the future, there is a small chance of having customers within India. So one set of customers would come from the startups which wanting to launch their own constellation of satellites. Either it is the academic level or in for the commercial level, but that quantity is extremely small right now. And also, like additionally, they have to pay GST within India. If someone else want to use Indian launch services, they need not pay GST, 18% GST. Well, an Indian customer to an Indian company need to pay 18% GST. So that might be slightly cost prohibitive, and they might mostly want to choose other countries or larger launch vehicles on ride-share missions, which will reduce the cost. So, but still, that portion of the market within India is very small. And also, like one emerging market is from the strategic sector, who sees ISRO as one of their customers. Probably, today they're the only customer, but tomorrow there can be multiple players who will be acting in this upstream sector. But for them, it's a very long way. Probably in the next 2-3 years, I don't think anything would come up. Looking at the current financial situation in the country, because a lot of investments need to be taken place, in order to have that kind of targets which they have set for. So looking overall, definitely, I think the only market is abroad. So it's like Indian upstream companies have to look for almost like you can say next 3 years, it will be 100% market would be from outside India. So that is to answer the first question. That's not uncommon because the ISR has launched already like more than 300 foreign satellites, and it's very common for the satellite industry also to ship from one country to another. In fact, entire Europe ships their own launch vehicles and their own satellites, to South America and launches. So it's like shipping of satellites to different countries is already common in the industry, and that so domestic market within India, I foresee may not be there in the next 2-3 years. But there are definitely chances coming up, especially with the strategic sectors, and also the news, depending on how the startups grow. So there is definitely chance beyond 2-3 years. There might be a good amount of domestic market that might come up, but definitely not in the next 2-3 years. And to answer the other question, basically what I see is that in the next 2 years for upstream sector to scale, first thing, the policy needs to be very clear. It should be very crystal clear on the licensing procedures because it's quite intense to develop the licensing procedures for upstream sector. And of course, but all the procedures exist because ISRO does regular licensing procedures, and most probably, these licensing procedures will be developed by ISRO itself. And so first thing is that the policy and regulation should be clear, and of course that I hope it happens quite soon. And also, if it doesn't come in the form of an act, it can come as a case-by-case basis for various companies. And second major thing required is allowing the use of government facilities, because India has been a spacefaring nation for the last 50 years. There has been like a lot of infrastructure developed, a lot of testing facilities, launch facilities. There is one more new launch facility coming up in India. There's a lot of investment, public investment, which has taken place in the space, especially in the upstream sector, and that facilities should be shared with the private upstream companies which are coming up. That is the second change which is required to scale. And the third thing is that basically if you think long term, as India, if you look the launch vehicles we are developing, even the bigger launch vehicles like GSLV Mark III, they are not as per they're not as per the international standards where the launch vehicle industry is heading to. Like for example, especially what SpaceX and Blue Origin are building. It's completely reusable launch vehicles, and Starlink is built and it's being built. So there's a lot of change in the tech aspect, and we're way behind as a country in long-term launch requirements if you see in the next 20 years. So I see that there should be a definite very good collaboration between the private space sector and the government space sector, especially in the upstream sector. to see that we are actually at par, or at least bridge the gap between the current capabilities within India and the futuristic requirements which we require as a country, as a policy level, and as to keep. In fact, we are the very proud country when it comes to space. But still, like when it comes to launch vehicles, we're looking at what the private countries, private companies are doing abroad. Especially in US, it's like there's a lot of gap which needs to be filled, and I believe it can be done definitely with good very positive collaboration between ISRO and the private sector. And of course, this might be a little bit long term, but still it totally depends on the mindset of the management at ISRO, which I believe soonly it will open up and it will be more like bridging. And even if you see, SpaceX is mostly NASA, mostly NASA funded. Even Falcon 9 majorly funded by NASA, and most of the missions are funded by government. It has to be a collaboration between the government and the private sector. So these are the three things which will help us scale down the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Pawan. I actually agree with a lot of what you said, and specifically, some of your comments related to the licensing and the regulation and the intersection between government and the private companies. And certainly in the future, we would like to do a more detailed webinar on that particular topic, and we'd love to hear from you on that particular subject. Moving on, thank you guys for those answers. Moving on to the sort of second question of some of what you guys have been talking about. What that means for the startup opportunities in the space sector in India. And I want to start with Vishesh, who is an investor in space with his company Speciale Invest. And as such, you have experience of the funding cycle in the sector. And I wonder, with that in mind, how can space startups gain sufficient follow-up investments to scale their products and services? Probably something highly impacted by COVID today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I think each industry sort of sees a certain amount of cycle and time that it needs to achieve investor interest or maturity, right? I think a few of the guys on this call have sort of spearheaded what I call Space 1.0, which they sort of started 10 years ago, like the likes of Narayan and folks, right? And then you've got people like Pawan and a couple of other companies that we've sort of partnered with, who are sort of now leading what I call 2.0, or the next sort of way for space and innovation. Capital for deep tech startups is hard to come by. Yes, it's a fact that I will not dismiss. But I think most investors worry about the lack of predictability for them, or view into what the customer looks like and what the end state business is going to look like. They do worry that sometimes these could take long. There could be other interventions from a legal standpoint that could make it murky. But I think there are a couple of positive leads that I've sort of picked up from there specific to our learnings. We've been successful in having a couple of our companies raise follow-on money. Of course, the judgment is still out. But I think we're positive, like how Pawan mentioned, that the future will be of collaboration. And we believe that we will collaborate with ISRO and with other universities outside as well, and other research organizations. And that the legal landscape will hopefully get more clearer and better along the way. The other important piece is for our companies to also start, alongside a lot of the tech and the innovation that we're building, also start having very clear end state vision of who our customers are, be it upstream, be it downstream. Like how Pradeep mentioned, on the downstream side, it's not just that you can get access to an image from a satellite, but what is the end business outcome or business decision that you're driving as a result of this timely or accurate access of data. And on the upstream side, one has to then sort of show that if there is a certain category of satellites that you do want to launch, like you asked, Pawan, that there is a market, be it inside or outside the country, that's large enough that despite the sort of competitive landscape allows for people to build business. I think the effort is a lot more heavier on the entrepreneur side. And we have a lot of regard for all the entrepreneurs on this call and outside, because they're taking the heavy lifting of educating the investor environment of what the opportunity is, and they have to sort of do a lot more to sort of get us up and running and aware. So in summary, I think one, showing end state and showing customer traction. Of course, for a launch company, it's not going to be easy for you to have a paying customer. It's not a SaaS software product, but incremental traction towards that, showing evidence that those customers exist. And similarly, even for the downstream guys to actually show that they have a business use case. I think that matters quite a bit, because I think that helps build some conviction that there is a commercial business opportunity beyond the innovation. Sometimes we get clouded and caught up in just the innovation. And I mean, I'm referring to the investors, and we're not able to sort of see the end state. And I think a little bit of a help and a nudge from how people sort of message their story will help us get there. I also think it's a matter of time. Like I said, we've seen 4 or 5 high quality companies out there doing some very credible stuff. And the next 18, 24 months, we will see a lot more of them stepping up, showing proof of the pudding, showing traction, at which point of time they should be able to attract capital. Capital is available, but there's a question of where it's being allocated today. Of course, it's being less allocated to deep tech and specifically less allocated to space, but I believe that it will change in time.
Fantastic. I mean, you raise an issue that certainly a lot of government agencies that fund or looking to fund companies, they come across as well. Where is the commercial win as well? It's not just about the grants. They want to build a market and see some sort of return so that they can continue to support the industry. So again, another topic we'd love to talk about in more detail in the future. Just very quickly, given what you do and some of the companies that you've invested in, are there any sort of prominent B2B or B2C opportunities for startups today? Just very quickly.
So I think we've attempted to play across the spectrum. We've got a company in the upstream. We've got a company called Agnikul that is building launch vehicles for small satellites. We've got a company in the communication space. It's called Astrogate Labs. They make terminals for flight and on-ground using lasers or optics. We've got another company called Kava Space, which is working on the downstream, where we're essentially looking at helping businesses make decisions smarter, faster, better. So I think I think in all of these, they're all sort of B2B opportunities. I think from a CapEx and tech, if less intensive, I think the downstream tends to play on a little better, because you don't necessarily need tens of crores to sort of put out a little bit of CapEx in all of those. So those could be interesting opportunities, but I think one needs to then sort of play out what domain and what vertical and what is that competitive advantage that you're building beyond accessing data.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for answering those questions, Vishesh. And moving on to Abhilasha, and sticking to the topic of startup opportunities in the sector. Abhilasha, can you draw on your experience with Blue Sky Analytics, where you use geospatial data to develop environmental insights? Do you believe there is sufficient downstream opportunities being captured by startups in India today?
No, I don't think nearly there is enough downstream ecosystem in India, because there are hardly 5 or 10 of us, and that I know it firsthand from the constraints that come from the human capital. When you're trying to go hire engineers and data scientists, and the journey, the upskilling journey that we have to take on that. And the market for Indian startups doesn't have to be just India. That's one of the worst things to think about when you're looking at downstream. Downstream doesn't have the same limitations as upstream. You can be based out of India, you can build it out of India, and you can serve customers all over the world. And that's something which we do very aggressively. We have sort of inbound pipelines and customers from Australia, Latin America, America. I mean, we are also at this nexus of environment and satellite data. So most of those problem statements and most of those challenges are across continents. So it's not exactly, and when you're talking about, it's more about identifying where in the value stream, what are the questions that you're solving for which all people. We've had both approaches, I think, in this conversation about like finding the right product market fit, finding the more customers, absolutely align people, closing those contracts, which is absolutely important, especially if you're in like sort of a SaaS or DaaS business, to almost like showcase to yourself and to other people that you can close a deal and you can price your product, and those steps are really important. But the other more important step is actually a level of abstraction that we have taken over the past 3 months. Is when you take a level of abstraction, you're able to build something which is much farther suiting, which can, you know, for instance, we were working in air quality data APIs. We were abstracting information on air pollution and, you know, quality of air from satellite data. And it was like, so much of that process is same as like water pollution. What are we doing here, right? You have to take a step back and induce some level of abstraction so you can think much bigger and think much broader. And then as a founder, obviously, I have to balance both elements, you know, so that we can build very broad and extensive tech while we also like close customers. But I've been always saying, like, if I have to bet on downstream, I will bet on India. If I have to bet on upstream, I just simply don't think we will be able to match the American like scales of economy and American appetite for risk. Actually, that appetite for risk is something you wouldn't even find like 10% in India. You know, even for us, like getting contracts, getting a lot of like work, the appetite for risk in America is far-fetched. It's like, take the money, go build it. Maybe you will fail, you know, maybe you will succeed. So, and that's what actually creates not just good innovation, like, you know, there is a lot of focus on closing customers in India, but you have to give yourself time to build the right kind of technology with the right kind of VC support, because also you get like pretty, you know, drawed out with VCs who are not the most aligned and everything, right kind of support so that you can eventually, you know, get the big customers eventually, you know, and that eventuality you have to manage it out. It can't be too far out because the venture capital, I've been in investing business before, it's not there forever, you know, everybody has to get the returns. But then focusing too much on it in like first 6 months of your existence is not really the most cool idea. But yeah, like, I mean, definitely this engineering talent is nowhere in the world. If I was doing the same thing what I'm doing in India, in the US, I would need 10 times the capital and still I wouldn't be able to build what we have already built. So all bets on downstream, I would still play in India.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think you raise a pertinent point related to culture. And it isn't just India, you know, Europe, UK certainly has the same issue when it comes to risk. I would probably say it's just America that has that unique sort of risk-taking culture. And even related to some of your points about abstraction, maybe it's the way we think about space and it's the way we think about business that needs to change as much as our actual approach. But thank you very much for your comments there, Abhilasha. And then finally moving to sort of the last question of where can India collaborate more effectively globally, and reflecting on some of those points that have already been made. Arfan, I'm looking at you. Could you draw on your experience in the UK Space Agency on what you think India and the UK can do to develop and improve their collaboration in the space sector?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to all the colleagues that have joined up this webinar. First of all, Raqib, thanks very much for the opportunity. I'm Arfan Chaudhury, I'm the Head of International Policy at the UK Space Agency. It's worth noting that the UK Space Agency is just over 10 years old, and we celebrated our 10th birthday in April in very interesting times. We're an organisation that effectively manages the strategic decisions on behalf of the UK government for our UK civil space programme, and dare I say, try and provide a clear and single narrative for the UK space ambitions. So that means bringing in industry, and we do that through our UK Trade Association, UK Space, and with our academia. And we have a number of those, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, specifically in respects of our academic links that we have and how we tie that into our national ambitions. We also look to deliver collaborative space programs that maximize, from our perspective, economic benefit, scientific exploration and scientific endeavor, but also where there are policy benefits for the UK. I think Pawan talked a little bit about the governance structure and whether there needs to be a case by case or whether there needs to be a formal act. It's worth noting that the UK Space Agency in 2018 initiated the UK Space Act, which provided the necessary governance for companies operating and delivering space capability services out of the UK. We cover a range of roles and responsibilities in the context of that, and I specifically look after our international engagement. About 80% of our budget of about £700–800 million a year goes into the European Space Agency, and that will continue despite our exit from the EU. But we will continue to be a long-standing partner of the European Space Agency and collaborate on a number of programs. But equally, we're now developing a strong national program to sit alongside our ESA ambition. And the intent is to look at further collaboration with our key strategic partners. The intent is essentially about raising the awareness and developing the forum for the space sector. We talked about upstream, but crucially as well, the downstream activity, as you've just heard, is probably the significant area of growth and level of scale up that we expect to see. We've done that through a series of international agreements that we formed, MOUs, and if you go onto the ukspaceagency.gov.uk website, you'll see the link to all of our public available MOUs that have been established, and it gives you a hint there of some of the areas of collaboration we've developed with some of our key strategic partners. We're very much looking to work up for joint projects where there might be indigenous strengths that each country brings to that particular program. But crucially, we're also looking at academic links. And it's worth noting that when you look from a trade perspective, we work very closely with our Department for International Trade. And certainly in, I think it was January this year, Raqib was fortunate enough to join a first UK space-focused trade mission that visited India, working with our DIT India colleagues, involved around 13 UK companies, and we focused on business, academia and government, visiting facilities and government offices in Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore. But crucially in the context of that, Raqib also took the opportunity to visit the space park in Kerala. And I think you're going to hear more in the context of that, because when we look at from a UK perspective, we have a number of well-renowned universities, the Oxfords, the Cambridge, the Leicester, Surrey, that are renowned for their space technology and capability. And we have developed national academic hubs around those. And a particular one is our Harwell facility in Oxford, which develops some of that key cutting edge technology. Coupled with that, we're also looking to identify specific programs of bilateral cooperation that we can identify with each country. And India is one of those that we've explored for a number of years. There have been a number of challenges, I'll be quite honest in the context of that, but we are looking to work together to perhaps look at establishing or enabling a regulatory framework, looking at market protection issues, export controls, the IP protection. And those are all areas that we want to look at from our perspective. But crucially from my perspective, I think working on projects that take advantage of our specific strengths. You may be aware that we have an international partnership program which works principally in Latin America and Africa, which looks at identifying capability from space, specifically space data and solutions to provide positive practical impact on life for those in particularly developing countries in respects of agriculture, weather, climate, urban development. And you'll be aware that agri-tech is a specific area that we're now focusing on. And finally, from my perspective, we talked about those academic tie-ups, and it's well known that UK and India have had long history of joint academic collaboration, and the UK is host to, I think, one of the largest Indian diaspora student population in the world. And I think it's important that from the space science perspective, we look at further opportunities for collaboration. And I was pleased to say, as I say, that join up that we had with our Kerala Space Park, and I want to explore over my time in this post more opportunities where there can be greater collaboration. I'll leave it at that if I may, Raqib, but I just want to touch on a couple of points that colleagues have already made. I think absolutely right about the interest of private venture capital and funding into the programs. In the UK, we have a company called Seraphim that does exactly that in terms of private venture funding. They are, as you would expect, going through a particularly difficult time at the moment. And we're exploring ways in which the UK, particularly UK government, can be a first user, first customer of some of this technology and capability that we're looking to invest in. From a private sector perspective, it's worth noting that both in the GEO and LEO era, area. We are expecting that to be a commercial business-to-business engagement, and the government involvement will be very much light touch. The focus specifically from the UK is looking at lunar comms, lunar basing, and then supporting the US in terms of their Artemis program, the onward mission to Mars as well. And we're looking at some of those particular areas of our skill set. And I think those are the kind of areas that we will want to focus on in the coming years. But I appreciate that the current global condition, the climates that we're in at the moment, make it particularly challenging. I'll leave it at that, if I may, Raqib.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Arfan. That was a very detailed answer. You know, just to let everyone know, we plan to do more webinars in the future. So if there's anything that you really want to do or talk about regarding the UK and collaboration when it comes to space, then do let me know. We can pose those questions and we can get the right panelists with what you think in mind. And moving on finally to our final panelist of the day, and again reflecting on where India can collaborate more effectively globally. Devleena, your company Numerate has been selected to work on various European space agencies programs like the Copernicus Disaster Management Program, and also other multilateral institutions like the UN World Food Program. Now, given your international experience, what do you think are the unique advantages that Indian companies have that give them an edge to capture such markets globally? And beyond that, what needs to be done at an institutional level to facilitate this?
Sure. Thank you for having me. And I'll start with a note that you guys can hear me all right, correct?
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. Good. So I'll start with a note that even Abhilasha said, agreeing to that an Indian company, you don't have to be necessarily catering to just the Indian audience. You can build global startup. And we have done this in Numerate as well. We are a very small team. And if we could do that, anybody can do that. Coming to the other factors that helps us being in the Indian subcontinent is availability of talent, which Abhilasha pointed, low cost, we are agile. The second thing is that we have a very large market and a very diverse market to try out our our applications. So nowhere in the world you have this various different customer segments, and you can really pilot and really test and really understand your customers better. To give you an example, the application that we are building in the last few days, given the COVID, and we are building a fisheries application. So what we typically do, just to give everybody a background, we connect the fishermen to the seafood buyers. To the fishermen, we offer sustainability, and we offer payments, fast payments. We offer them easy access to financial resources. But also for the seafood buyers, what we're helping them with is a traceability. We're helping them with the supply chain guarantee, and we're helping them with the quality. Given that context, COVID was a testing time for us, where I could reach out to almost 600 fishermen starting in the last 21 days, and we generated 40 lakhs of sales. And that is not easy, and that cannot be done in any other geography. We were able to do that because we have a large reach to customers, and because it's India, it's very easy to pilot, it's very easy to pivot, it's very easy to really pick a phone and talk to them. And everybody, people say we are not early adopters, but I've not seen that. I've seen India to be early adopters, maybe not everybody, but you can definitely find one who's willing to try your solution. The other thing, just to say that, for as startups, we are agile, we are nimble, we are very flexible. To the other point of your question, where we need the institutions or the government, and I believe my fellow panelists have already addressed that, but I'll tell you something that I have realized. Space industry is, generally people relay space to a very esoteric application where nobody really understands the use of it. And it's not only necessary for us to really write white papers and float it on LinkedIn, white papers and float it on the social media. Actual users don't get to understand what the applications are. So I believe this is a good time for all of us to really understand, to make our solutions simplified and talk about the solutions in the diverse application of solutions to our real users in the market. We really need to reach out to actual users and tell them, okay, you might be in the fishing trade, you might be in a farming trade, you might be in a good trading trade, but we can help you, and there is an application of space. You have to simplify the dialogue. Then only you will find people to really warming up to your solutions. In our case, we had to really have engagements of fishermen for almost 2.5 years, training them in their language, making sure they're not building a very heavy tech platform. Now we know that they can easily use our platform on a day-to-day basis without any kind of tech training. So that way, I think we need to really simplify our approach to the market. And as in India, being in India, it's a great market. You can really try out from your language perspective, try out from your customer segment perspective, from a pricing perspective, and then expand and scale to in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much for that answer, Devleena. I think you raised one particular point that I think is really important, not just for India, actually, something that we saw in the UK over the last sort of 5-10 years, which is raising awareness. That's probably a bigger sort of holding back mechanism for space as anything else. People don't know what the impact of space data can be on their various industries. And I know the UK, for instance, has as a result instituted a series of industry dialogues with various downstream sectors, just working on telling them, look, this is what we can do for your sector. These are the kind of companies that are working on that. Potentially, that is something that India can work on in the future, and I think that's a very, very pertinent point. Anyway,
I'll just conclude this, because we have this forum where we have space industry leaders together, and I speak about this in every space industry forum, that we'll have to make access to ISRO data easy for startups in India.
Okay.
We are using ESA and NASA data, but I believe there's a continuous requirement from all of us. I can see everyone's smiling and agreeing with me. Kind of application that I'm building, I can very much use OceanSat data, but it's not available online. It's not available to download. So if we have already placed this request to ISRO, and I believe ISRO is a big organization. It takes a lot of time to move paperwork, but if they can really work fast on it and make things easier for us to access, we can also increase shorten our build time. So that's a request I've been making, and again, I'll be using this platform to reach out to ISRO on this.
Please do.
Raqib, I want to get back on Devleena's point, actually. So customers, especially the early customers, the first guy who's going to do your pilot is it's a pretty challenging problem, especially for the industry. The fun fact about Indians is that as long as they don't have to pay a huge amount of money for a pilot, they're really, really willing to do that. And that for most early stages companies is awesome, because you can try and test and do all sorts of mistakes and do terrible customer service, which you do in the first year because you're still learning, and your customers don't really get upset with you. The kind of mistakes you've done in last year, if we were to do that in any other market, we would have such a bad name. But in this market, people are much more acceptable and much more experimenting and much more forgiving. And with that, I would even say the Indian government, they might not pay you and they might not form the best customer, but they're one of the best testing grounds to do random experiments and figure out what your customer journey and what your product development should look like.
Fantastic. I completely agree with you. I think we've got potentially another webinar, and certainly a project that Bridge India can work on. Though, of course, I also heard from that space is a sector to move into if you make a lot of mistakes, because apparently they're easily forgiven. So thank you very much, everyone. And that's just the panelist session sort of done. We do have some questions from the audience, which I will pose to a few of you, and I'll be grateful if you could answer them. So if we start, actually, we can start probably with you, Abhilasha. You've probably answered this really in some ways. This is from Aravind. He asked, why is India not doing much more with EO data exploitation, considering especially that we are a software powerhouse? What is missing, and what can be done better?
So we'll do better. We're gonna probably 100, 200 people in the next 2-3 years to do more play around with EO data. It's terrible. We have genuinely one of the best talents ever in the world, and we are playing with I use this term. We're playing with mascara data, shoe data, to try to sell more mascara and shoe. EO data is just so much fun. So whoever is asking this question, please apply to us. Please read about the bigger problem and the big constraint for a lot of firms is that gap. So traditional data analytics is very different. And you have traditional data analysts, traditional business analysts who apply for roles with us. And we're like, oh my God, so sorry, you're 1 year behind in your understanding of anything you will be able to do with it, because the kind of files you need to do, kind of infrastructure you need to be pretty like sort of skilled in. So that skill gap, and I think more and more the industry grows, more folks like us can go out in the world and tell, like, please go learn this, please go learn that. Like, do not waste your time on Power BI. If you want to apply for a job with us, it doesn't count. Excel doesn't count as data analytics. Please like hone up your coding, AWS, Google Cloud skills, and then write to us. And we are here to hire, and there are more firms like us coming. So there is no shortage of demand for human capital. There is a clear mismatch in the market in like understanding of what is required to work in a space data analytic company.
Again, I think that points to the question, or points to the issue of raising awareness, potentially, again, something that we really need to consider as we move forward. Thank you for answering that question, Abhilasha. I'll move quickly to Vishesh. This is a question from Mr. Louise. I think it's a Mr. I can't tell. How far away are we from seeing a global venture fund making some big investments in downstream space in India?
Well, I think it's not too far. It's, like I said before, it's a question of companies showing readiness and traction. And I think with the likes of Abhilasha, Kava, and a few other folks out there who are making rapid progress beyond building product and getting customer use cases, I think it's a matter of 18 months, best case. You need to see some product maturity. You need to see some customer traction before the big dollars come in. They're not going to come just on faith. So we'll have to give it its time, but I think quite likely to come in.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I will probably address the next question for Pawan, especially given what he does. This is from Mr. Bhushan, who he asked, can you address the industry interaction in space technology and its transparency in providing equal opportunity in the talent acquisition?
So can you please repeat the question, Raqib?
Sorry, Pawan. Let me. Can you address the interaction between sort of institute? So I'm presuming this individual means governments and industry. The interaction between them when it comes to the sector of space, and whether there's a transparency in providing equal opportunity in the acquisition of talent.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a tricky question. So basically, in India, how talent acquisition happens, typically they only, whether it's ISRO, they only take freshers, so it's like just out of college, or there needs to be an exam which needs to be written, and that's how talent acquisition happens. In private sector, it's totally different. We only mostly recruit, people, experienced people, people at least with 5 to 10 years experience, and quite a little bit of freshers also. So it's like there is a very far difference between, how government agencies, acquire talent. And in fact, government agencies, it's the right way to do for them also, because, they groom the talent for 30 years. Typically, a person who joins ISRO, the attrition rate is almost nil. Almost people just come in and they retire out of ISRO. So that's how the talent acquisition there happens. But when it comes to private sector, it's more like dynamic, more, it totally depends on the needs. And also we recruit very less people. It's only like very short amount of people who are absolutely required. So totally talent acquisition is very, very well different between both government agencies and the private agencies. Yeah, if that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Before moving on to some of these other Q&As, I just want to quickly go to Narayan. And I just wanted, Arfan sort of mentioned it slightly. I wondered if you could quickly just talk a bit about the Kerala Space Park launch, the Kerala Space Park in and of itself, and what you think that can do for the Indian space sector. Certainly, we've seen that Harwell and places like Leicester Space Park in the UK has really driven our industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting bit that you have to take note in a country like India is that an institution like ISRO is, more independent, and states have their own independence to do a lot of things autonomously as well. So that is very interesting because ISRO is a central institution, and states are kind of independent by themselves. So that gives the ability for the state to become a possible pilot customer, or even support a lot of innovation in its hub. I think that's the new model that we are trying to test with the Kerala Space Park and see how things work. And hopefully we hope that kind of will mushroom out. And the other bit is, of course, if one state starts doing it, maybe the other states start picking up the same thing. That's what happened in the software revolution as well. And then there's competition between states. So we're hoping for a lot of that to happen, and that will also allow decision making to be more quicker, because the state has control over the decision making, and since the chief minister's office is directly involved, the decisions can be very quick as well. So those are some of the advantages, and how we see this to scale or attain scale over time.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I would urge everyone to really go and look at the Kerala Space Park, certainly if you're working in Indian space, because it's by work coming together in these kind of clusters that you can really push space in a country like India. Let me quickly ask one last question to Devleena. How do you, this is from Mr. Lakshmi, and I think his question is related to the intersection of different technologies. Namely, how do you sort of see space working alongside sort of present UAV and sort of drone technology, and applying geospatial and space data and analytics to downstream sectors such as agri-tech and urban planning?
Yes, I think we are barely scratching the surface as of now. We have many companies working in the agri space. I don't find many in the fishing side of things, so except us. But there are plenty more such applications that we have not explored in a big way. So there are multiple sides of it. So if I'm answering there are two parts of the question, what I believe. One is if there is enough downstream application. Yes, there are. And how do we collaborate? So, and how do we go about building it? So we have to design it ground up. It's not only understanding the data is available, but it's also understanding how your customer is going to perceive the data, how your customer is going to use their data in their day-to-day lives, how you're going to build a solution or build a product that your end customer or your target customer understands, given their tech background, given their culture background, given their beliefs and habits. Like, for example, you really have to be customer centric from that approach and not really think about on the technical side of things. So that should be abstracted. So I believe that if I have answered that question correctly, and that's what we also do in our entire application time. The most time we have spent is talking to various customers across India, across Sri Lanka, across other Southeast Asia countries, where we've understood if we are being able to value add in their daily lives. Otherwise, if you don't do that, your product or downstream application won't survive.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for answering that question. And with that last question, and given that it's 10:55 here in the UK, we're probably going to have to come to the end of today's webinar. I just want to say on behalf of Bridge India, I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to talk to me today. This was an absolutely fascinating session. I also want to thank all the attendees, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook, you for taking time to listen. I think in the session today, we explored some really pertinent questions that looked at what is necessary for the growth of the Indian space sector. I think Bridge India sees this webinar as the first of several activities we will undertake that is focused on the Indian space sector. And I think, we've seen from some of the questions that we've had today and discussions, certainly there is scope for more webinars to talk about some of the issues today in more detail. So if anyone wants to get involved in activities, in our activities aimed at space, or has any ideas of how we can support the growth of the Indian space sector, especially in Europe, Bridge India would love to talk to you. And so do get in contact with us. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye, and have a lovely day and have a lovely end of the week or rest of the week. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, guys. How do I exit?